Two of the biggest framework features that Stencil gives us on top of native web components is encapsulation and reactive rendering. In this video, we're going to look at both of these concepts and use them to create our first component. Stencil provides us with a state decorator to manage a component's internal data. Properties decorated with state cannot be modified from outside the component, but the component can modify them however it wants. Any changes to these properties will cause the component's render function to execute. Not every property needs to be decorated with state. It's actually usually better to avoid using it when possible. If we know the property won't change or doesn't directly affect how the component renders, we don't need to use this decorator. Stencil compares property references for changes, and if it detects a change, it re-renders the component. This means array and object changes won't trigger this re-render. When a user updates a property, we use the watch decorator to fire a handler method. This method is useful for validating props or handling side effects of a change. It's important to note that the watch decorator doesn't fire when a component initially loads. Let's put everything we've learned so far to use. We're going to create a component that accepts a timestamp as a property and outputs the amount of time since that in days, weeks, months, or years. Our component will accept a second property that allows the user to select which time period to display the time in. First, let's create our project using the npm init command. Then we'll use the generate command to scaffold our component. The generate command allows us to easily create our component, styles, and test files. Let's get on with making our component. Let's have a look at what we've done. First, we added two properties decorated with prop. We'll see how we can set these in a minute. We've also decorated the display value property with the state decorator. The diff method is pulled from the moment library. It compares the user timestamp input with the current time, converts the value to the desired time period, and returns the rounded result. As a side note, I can't state enough the incredible amount of value you can get from looking through open source projects and learning how they do things. One of my favorite things about the JavaScript community is the huge library of projects and talented developers to learn from. Once you dive into the rabbit hole and realize that these libraries and frameworks aren't just magic black boxes, but just normal JavaScript code that you and I can write, you start getting the confidence to create anything you can imagine. If there's only one lesson to take from this series, this should be it. The display method has one job: to set the display value property. By calling this, we're causing the component to re-render. When the component is loaded, we call the component willLoad lifecycle method to set the value of display value. Finally, the render method outputs the display value and a pluralized version of that unit. Stencil provides us with an HTML file to test our components. Let's create a quick layout and add our component. Here we've created a sample social media post and used our component to show how long ago it was posted. We can see two different ways to set our props. The first, most conventional way, is to set them using attributes on our component. However, this method doesn't allow us to pass objects. For this, we use JavaScript to directly access the component's public properties. We can see what our component looks like. There's one issue though. It'd be nice if the component updates itself rather than us having to refresh the page. This is where we can bring in the watch decorator. We made a single change to our code. We added a watch decorator above the display method and gave it a value of timestamp. This tells Stencil to re-render the component every time the timestamp property changes. Let's update our script in the index file to use a set interval to update the time value. Each second, we update the timestamp by 1 second. We can see the component updating itself every time the timestamp property changes. This is a great start, but there's a few things we can clean up. Firstly, we can convert this post into its own component. The CSS styles work, but we can make them easier to maintain by using a precompiler like Sass or Less. We could also make an API request to fetch posts and display them. We're going to be doing all this and more in the rest of the series. By the end, we should have a fully usable social media page design system. In the next video, we'll update our Stencil config to allow us to use a style precompiler. Make sure to hit like and subscribe so you don't miss it. See you in the next one.